Coming up on the Angus Report, how can fetal programming improve your herd?
The Senate introduced legislation to reform current ELD rules livestock haulers will face.
Do consumers care about food labels? We dive into the issue.
And hear about the Young Cattlemen's Conference from association colleague and event attendee, Kelly Ritalik.
This is the Angus Report. Hello and welcome to the Angus Report. I'm Bob Cervera.
And I'm Clint Mefford.
Our top news this week. Muscle and fat tissue are economically important for producers. That's according to Mississippi State University Assistant Professor of Muscle Biology and Meat Science, Darius Burnett. Burnett recently spoke at the Cattlemen's Boot Camp in Starkville, Mississippi. He explains how fetal programming is valuable for producers.
Muscle and fat development actually begins in utero prior to the animal calving, so it's important to understand how and when to feed our mama cows in order to maximize the growth and composition of their offspring.
Burnett says producers who are caring for a pregnant cow are also caring for the unborn calf.
For producers, I always like to end with the fact that you're basically feeding the fibers and feeding the fat cells postnatally. So muscle fiber number is established prior to birth in beef animals. So no matter what you do once the animal is born, you cannot increase the total number of muscle fibers. So therefore, it's important for us to maximize the number of muscle fibers that are developed during in utero growth, and then ultimately after that we can feed those fibers with whatever nutritional regimens that we feel are the most efficient.
There's an equation to maximize the growth potential of a calf's muscle fiber. Burnett shares.
There certainly is a relationship in postnatal growth potential and the total number of muscle fibers. The actual equation that determines muscle growth is muscle fiber number plus the size of those fibers. So if you insult one or both sides of that particular equation, then ultimately you end up with less muscle growth.
Burnett says genetics is a part of the equation for maximizing muscle fiber growth, but that's not everything. You must also provide adequate nutrition during the pregnancy.
The most common mistake or misconception is that we can rescue these compromised pregnancies in postnatal life. So we can put them on the best nutritional regimens and buy the highest quality feeds and supplements and mineral licks, etc. But the fact of the matter is, if you start off with a compromised platform, then the potential, you've jeopardized the potential of that particular animal. So I think the most common mistake is feeling as though that in utero period is not as important as it is.
Visit extension.msstate.edu for more information on fetal programming.
The Senate recently introduced legislation to address the problematic electronic logging device rules livestock haulers will face beginning September 30th. Formerly called the Modernizing Agricultural Transportation Act, the bipartisan bill would establish a working group at the Department of Transportation. The group would develop guidelines and help shape regulatory or legislative action. The ELD rule wouldn't be enforced until working group guidelines are proposed by the Transportation Secretary. Currently, the ELD mandate won't go into effect for livestock haulers until September 30th. Thanks to language that extends a waiver in an omnibus spending bill passed this spring. Ultimately, the bill would be a win for livestock haulers who are hoping for a permanent solution to the ELD mandate. The House also introduced similar legislation. We'll keep you updated as the legislation moves through Congress.
The decision consumers make at the grocery store impacts demand for the product farmers and ranchers produce every day. And food labels influence consumer spending in a big way. Mark Gale, the CEO at Charleston Orwig, explains his research into food labels.
Farmers should care about food labels because it's the intersection with the end user of the product. Now, whether or not that is a little bit more direct, like a steak or a pork chop, chicken breast, something like that, or in a product that's processed, it's the end connector. One of the things our research showed was that 63%, more than 63% of consumers think that what's on the label is very important to them. That's good news. And 71% are interested in nutrition information. The difficulty becomes that consumers don't always know what it means. Only about 29% consumers think that food companies are doing a good job of getting across that information. So it becomes very difficult for consumers, not only what I call the rectangle, the calories, fat content, all that, the government label, if you will, but then the claims that are on the package. It's hard for consumers to break through that. So what food manufacturers need to do is to delve into consumer needs and try to simplify and clarify a few key messages. You can't get everything across in the context of a label.
Believe the consumer. That'll help you share your agriculture story with people who are unfamiliar with farming and ranching.
Accept that their concerns and beliefs are real. They're real to them. That doesn't even mean that they're necessarily factually accurate, but at this moment in time for that consumer, that's a real issue to them. Try to understand what the drivers are related to that, and then explain those things to the consumer. We live in a society that is rich in food, thanks to the American farmer, but and abundant and safe and very affordable. So now consumers, I think because they have the luxury of not just being worried about having enough to eat the way they are in some parts of the world, now we have the luxury of starting to ask more questions about our food and where is it from? How's it made? Our challenge is to figure out how to break through the clutter to help them understand the points that they're interested in, to provide that information in a form that is easily attainable to them.
Gail is hopeful and says you should be too.
Despite all the craziness happening, consumers tell us that, I'd go back to those statistics, they're very interested in food labels, and they're very interested in nutrition and the information that's on there. That's a great opportunity, because when I'm down to that consumer and one product, I have somebody, a captive audience, who said, what's on this package is important to me, and I'm willing to dig into it for information. That's a tremendous opportunity.
Pharmaceutical and life sciences company Bayer recently announced its acquisition of Monsanto closed, but the two companies haven't begun to integrate their operations yet. The $63 billion transaction means Monsanto will be no more. The American Angus Association released updated percentage tables and breed averages for EPDs and dollar values this month. The association also updated main and supplement sire listings and economic assumptions. Visit angus.org for more information. The association is also accepting orders for the 2019 Angus Black Book calving books. Orders are due July 31st and will be shipped in mid-October. Visit your AAA login today to order yours. We check in now on the latest cattle market news with our market update, brought to you by CattleFax.
Hello, I'm Troy Bockelman with the CattleFax Update. As corn planting is near completion at 97% and corn emergence is 86% complete, the market will now look to determine the crop potential. The Corn Crop Condition Index is a weighted average of the crop weighted excellent, good, fair, poor, and very poor. This measurement gives an indication of the crop condition and resulting yield potential. With spring moisture throughout the Corn Belt region, planting had a delayed start in the northern region. Yet once farmers got into the field, quick progress was made. This wet spring weather, followed by warmer weather, created excellent conditions for the crop emergence. Currently, the Corn Crop Condition Index is a 78. This was steady with last week and the highest open for the Crop Condition Index since 2007. This is also 3 points above the 10-year average. For the 22nd week of 2018, ending June 3rd, conditions in Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois are at or above the highest rating in the last 10 years. Michigan, Indiana, Minnesota, Nebraska, and South Dakota and Missouri are all above the 10-year average. With dry weather and drought conditions in parts of Kansas and Texas, the crop condition in these regions are reflecting this. Kansas is steady with the 10-year average, and Texas, at a crop condition index of 65, is 6 points below the 10-year average. While this is a great start to the beginning of the corn growing season, It is important that Mother Nature continues to provide the moisture needed at the right times of the corn development stages. With corn acres decreased by 2.2 million acres in the prospective plantings report to 88 million acres and USDA trendline yield of 174 bushels an acre, corn production is expected to decline just over 500 million bushels from the year prior. Expansion across three major protein sectors of beef, pork, and poultry, corn exports, and increased corn use for ethanol will be supportive demand. Tighter production and supported demand will tighten U.S. corn stocks to use in 2018 and 19. The crop condition index will give an indication of yield potential, and it will be important to watch this factor moving forward. Expect increased volatility in the corn market as the participants look to determine the yield potential. For the Angus Report and Cattle Facts, I'm Troy Bockelman.
To learn more about Cattle Facts, your leading source for beef industry market information, visit cattlefacts.com. When we return, we visit a New Mexico ranch family to talk about raising cattle in a challenging environment.
The Angus Report will be back after this.
Every part of the country has its own production challenges. Manny Asenius and his family talk about what it takes to raise high-performance cattle while making sure the herd can still survive the New Mexico climate. Raising cattle in New Mexico isn't for the faint of heart. From dramatic elevation changes to low stocking rates, there are many obstacles.
Well, living in the Southwest, we're always challenged by the fact that 2/3 of the time we're going to be in a drought. So we're always planning and preparing for dry conditions. Obviously, every drop of rain we're grateful for, and it really, in our environment, we can grow really good forage with a little amount of rain. Our country's very resilient. We're coming out of the longest and most severe drought, and so it's very much a part of what we prepare for, what we live with. We definitely feel blessed because there are other parts of the country that just have their own challenges.
Even when there is enough water, it's often too high in iron and sulfur.
In our part of the world, you would think in the arid Mountain West that water quantity would be a major challenge, but from a performance standpoint, it's actually water quality that a lot of ranchers face. And water quality is one of those challenges because they present a lot of antagonists that decrease the absorption of trace minerals that are very important for reproduction and also the health of our calves.
Time and study have taught rancher Manny Asenius how to have both high-performing genetics and ones that work in tough conditions.
We have really done a great job of getting good, powerful genetics, something that we can produce a good, desirable product for our consumer in. I do believe, though, that, again, we've had to make some changes to our management to be able to match, what the cattle need based on what we have available. So we've had to change things up some.
But Asenius says filling in nutritional gaps doesn't need to be costly. It's just paying attention to details. Anyone who says high-gaining and grading cattle can't live in the Southwest hasn't tried this approach.
My mind has changed probably over the last 10 years on that whole aspect of it because we do know that if those cattle are managed correctly, and I really place a lot of emphasis on the micronutrition of those types of higher curve bending type of genetics, they'll work in our environment. I still think that we definitely need cattle that get out and travel. They have to when we have stocking rates of 100 acres per cow. They definitely have to get out there and travel. But I think if we can manage their micronutrition, starting with the trace minerals, getting more trace minerals into the blood, really trying to make the digestive system work as efficient as possible, those cattle will work phenomenal. And in the end, we'll be able to meet the higher demands for beef across the world.
Asenius says when you bring in cattle from other parts of the world to the Southwest, even management as simple as controlling parasites can make an impact on their adaptation success. Visit blackinkwithcab.com and angus.org for more information. Back with the Angus Report after this.
National Cattlemen's Beef Association held its annual Young Cattlemen's Conference earlier this month. I sat down with Angus Genetics Incorporated Genetic Services Director Kelly Ritalik, who was selected to attend this year's tour. So Kelly, tell us about your recent experiences traveling with the YCC crew.
Well, Clint, as you know, it's a 10-day long conference. We started in Denver, Colorado at the NCBA headquarters. We also traveled to JBS at their headquarters and met with their executives there in the office, and came back, and we ended our tour in Denver, Colorado at the Greeley Hat Works, where many of my fellow participants went ahead and bought some cowboy hats. Myself, they don't really work for my face, so I stayed away from those, but it was definitely a great time in Denver. From there, we actually flew to Chicago, Illinois, and we got to meet with executives from Tyson. We went to the new McDonald's headquarters and met with their leaders.
So one thing that's really unique about YCC is it brings a lot of people from the beef industry together, people that wouldn't normally connect on a daily basis. Can you describe a little bit about that experience and some of the folks you met and connected with?
Yeah, so there's a wide variety of people. Myself, I was from a breed association, and there was a few other breed associations that would send representatives to the conference. Along with that, we had many people that were in the cow-calf industry. But it was unique in having the opportunity that we had a lot of feeders on the trip. We had a lot of people that owned feedlots, and so it was an interesting take to be able to talk to them, because I work with cow-calf producers on a daily basis, and we have a lot of great conversations, but really getting into that next step and seeing how we can build off of each segment of the industry and kind of become more a whole. So it was really neat to interact with them for 10 days.
During your travels on YCC and meeting with these different groups, what are some opportunities they see ahead for the beef industry as a whole?
One of the resounding things we heard from each segment that we got to visit with and the people along the way was the fact that us as a beef community really need to tell our story. Consumers, and we hear it all the time, right? Consumers want to know where their food comes from. They want to make sure it's been treated in an ethical manner. They want to make sure that our way of life is sustainable. And as beef cattle producers in the beef community, we know it's sustainable. But we have to make sure that we tell our story, because that's a way for us to make sure that we can maintain our lifestyle and continue to move forward and continue to really raise a safe and humane product for our consumers to eat. And so finding ways, whether that's through blogging or getting on different interviews or having the opportunity just to reach those people and be able to tell our story, is something that every single person, whether it was Tyson or JBS or even our legislators in Washington, D.C., our main goal was to get out there and tell our story of what we do in the beef community.
Sure. Of course.
So Clint, you also went on YCC the year before I did and had the opportunity to partake. What were kind of some of your favorite things that you got to deal with?
I would definitely say that the legislative trip was the highlight, right? And getting to see how the legislative process really works, and all the work that NCBA does on behalf of cattlemen across the country on the Hill. Being a former livestock judging contestant, I would say that meeting with the representatives and the senators was a lot like preparing oral reasons, and I loved that part of it. I thought that was great. So those were my favorite parts.
Yeah, DC was definitely a highlight, I think, for everyone on our trip, and having that opportunity to kind of take yourself out of something that many of us had never done before and put you in that driver's seat. And we actually have had some feedback from congressmen that have actually co-signed some transportation bills out of the work that we actually did on the Hill. So that was pretty interesting to be part of that process.
Right. Thanks to the Angus Foundation for sponsoring John Dickinson and Kelly Ritalik this year. Find out how you can attend next year's YCC at beefusa.org. Stay right here. The Angus Report will be back after this.
Bodie Langford is a Texan through and through. He's a fourth-generation cattle rancher who shares why he enjoys the challenge of continuous improvement in his Angus herd.
I love a newborn calf, and knowing that I have designed the genetics for that calf and that he's a product of cattle that I have put together and genetic matings, and then watching that calf develop in a good year when we have ample groceries, and seeing them really reach their genetic potential and grow up to be a big stout bull and a product that I can market proudly to other cattle producers is the greatest satisfaction that I have in this business. I just love raising the cattle and watching them grow up and develop. I'm a fourth generation cattle rancher, and my great-grandfather moved to Texas in 1872 and started driving cattle up the trail to Kansas. He started our family cattle business and our legacy nearly 150 years ago, and I started Langford Cattle Company here in 1978. It was almost an accident that I got into the Angus business. When my grandfather passed away, he had just bought 2 young Angus bulls, and I had a large herd of crossbred cattle that I was running down here, and I brought those 2 Angus bulls home. At the time, I was growing and feeding a lot of cattle and taking them to the feed lot, and I put the young Angus bulls on some crossbred cows, and that was the finest set of steers that I ever raised, and they brought top dollar out of all my calves that year, and the replacement females out of those Angus bulls were just outstanding. So I decided I would start raising my own. I thought I could raise them cheaper than I can go out and buy them, and my neighbors started seeing the bulls and they started wanting them, and pretty soon I had a lot of demand for Angus bulls, and I had just transitioned into that over the years. The ranching lifestyle provides the greatest form of independence for a family. It's the finest lifestyle that a person can have, living on the land, providing food for the American society. It's the very best way to raise a family out in the country. I know that I could go to town and make a lot more money doing other things, but it's what I love to do. I love the cattle. I love the people involved with the cattle business, and it's just who I choose to be around with and what I want to do for a living.
Boy, Bodie speaks true words of wisdom.
Well, it's such a beautiful country to raise cattle and a family.
Most definitely. Visit Angus.org to view more episodes from I Am Angus. And that's all for this week's Angus Report.
We'll return next week at this time for more cattle news and highlights.
In the meantime, subscribe to Angus TV's YouTube channel to view more segments from the show.
Thanks for joining us.